Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, this is Terry Levette, and I am one of 4 in-house lawyers for McWane and all of McWane's companies. And I want to talk to you today. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Just so you know, a little housekeeping. One, we are recording this meeting, so it will be available on a SharePoint site in the very near future, and I will let everybody know when that is available and how you find it, if you want to check back on that. Secondly, I have everybody muted on entry, so we can't hear you. So if you have any questions, you can send them to me in the chat feature, or you can email me after the presentation is over. So today we're going to talk about, actually I see a lot of people joining in, so I'm going to give it just another minute before I actually dive in. Okay, so today we're going to talk about contracting, and specifically about contract terms and conditions. And at the end, I'd like to just speak a tiny bit about contract management and our contract management policy. So just a little background. What is a contract, and why is it important? Why are we even talking about this? Well, at its simplest, a contract is nothing more than a meeting of the minds of one or more parties, or 2 or more parties. You know, it should represent what the parties have agreed to with respect to a particular subject. It should set out an allocation of risks between the parties so that the parties know what their obligations are and what the results would be if they didn't follow those obligations. From our standpoint, we're looking at contracts, and they're important because we want to make sure that they protect our company's assets. Contracts are legally enforceable, and there are sometimes severe consequences for breaching them. And most contracts provide remedies for failure to comply with whatever is required in them. So how do you form a contract? There have to be 2 things: an offer and acceptance, and consideration. And consideration does not mean being kind in this case. It means giving something for getting something. Each party has to give something to get something. So within those 2 elements, offer and acceptance. An offer can be oral or it can be written. A handshake agreement can be a contract, whether it's ever written down or not. If you have an offer and the other party says, well, I like your offer, but I want to do something else, that's not an acceptance. That's a counteroffer. And you don't have a contract until the counteroffer is accepted. And then you can also accept a contract by performing whatever has been offered. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Those of you who have seen some of this presentation before know that I like to use the example of selling my jacket. So if I go to John and I say, John, I want to sell you my jacket for $5. And John says, okay, I'll buy your jacket for $5. We have a contract because there has been an offer, and there has been acceptance, and there has been consideration. In other words, John is going to is giving something for getting the jacket. John is giving money, and I'm giving the jacket. So, but let's change the scenario just a little bit. Let's say I go to John and I say, I want to sell you my jacket for $5. And John says, well, I want to buy your jacket, but I only want to pay $3 for it. Do we have a contract? Not yet. because what John has done is he has made a counteroffer. And until I accept his counteroffer, we don't have a contract. Now, if I say I want to buy, if John comes to me and he says, I want to buy your jacket for $5, and I don't say anything, but I take the jacket off and I hand it to him, do we have a contract? Yes, we probably do, because I have accepted John's offer by performing what he asked. I gave him the jacket. Now, he'll have to give me the money, but we have a contract. So what you call a contract is not definitive, and you can form a contract in many ways, but you just got to always remember there has to be an offer and acceptance of that offer, and there has to be something given by each party. Things like other names for contracts that we run across frequently would be things like order. A purchase order is a contract. Agreement, letter of intent can be a contract. Memorandum of understanding, or MOU, can be a contract. Recruiting agreement, beneficial reuse agreement, confidentiality agreement or non-disclosure agreement, NDAs. Those are all names for contracts that we run across frequently. So what happens a lot of times in contracts for sale and purchase, which are the majority of the contracts that our companies use, is that a customer, we'll give that example, a customer will send a purchase order and say, I want to buy, so much of our goods for so much money. And we get it, and the purchase order says, and the sale is subject to customers' terms and conditions. Well, we don't always like their terms and conditions. In fact, most of the time we take issue with many of them. So how can we make sure that we're not going to accept a contract that we don't want to accept or terms that we don't want to accept? So what happens in that situation is something that is known in contracting as battle of forms. Let's see if I can get rid of this box. Annoying. Okay. So battle of forms occurs when one party sends a document over and it says contract subject or sale subject to my terms and conditions, and the other party sends a response back that says, okay, we acknowledge your order, but it's subject to our terms and conditions and not yours. It's like, not yours, mine. So who wins? Well, generally, the one who has the last word wins. This could go on for a long time, you might recognize. Party could send one over and says, subject to my terms. Other party sends it back and says, not yours, mine. And then they come back and say, no, not yours, mine. It could go on forever. Usually it doesn't go that far. But what can trump that would be a signature. So if one party signs the agreement, the offer, and doesn't say anything about, doesn't take issue with whatever terms are referenced there or included there, then that signature would mean that would indicate agreement. So how do we as a company assure that we always win? Well, we don't always win, but how do we try to assure that we win? Because we like our terms. We spend a lot of time developing them, and they're protective of the company and the company's assets. Well, one way that we assure at McQuain that we assure that we win is that we include our terms and conditions on all credit applications, all invoices, order acknowledgments. We've recently been including some for at least one division in some email order acknowledgments because there was no formal order acknowledgment at the time before we would begin performance. So these are all ways that we try to make sure that we win the battle of forms and our terms and conditions govern those contracts. So here is one thing I want you to take away if you take nothing else away from this presentation. Please read the contract. I know that a lot of people think, oh, well, that's just boilerplate language. Well, that boilerplate language has important things in it that can affect our company. You need to know what's in it. So let's talk about some of those important contract terms. There are basically two kinds of terms in contracts. There are commercial terms, things like, okay, what's being bought or sold or done, provided or protected, what's being, what price is being paid for whatever's being bought, sold, or provided. When are you going to get whatever it is that's covered under the contract? Those are things that everybody would recognize are important for you to see in a contract. What is often called boilerplate language, and therefore often overlooked by most people, are liability terms. Those are things that can trip us up because they may provide, may be requiring us to do things that like indemnify somebody, or they'll cover, what happens if the contract is breached, or they'll include a warranty that we may or may not want to accept. So we need to pay attention to those liability terms. Now, what's important in a particular contract depends on what that contract is for. Now, I'm going to talk about 4 different kinds that are important to McWane's businesses that we see frequently. This is by no means a complete list of the kinds of contracts that we will encounter or that you may encounter. Sale or purchase of our goods or services, sale or purchase of goods or services, whether we're buying or whether we're selling. Protection of confidential and proprietary information, that would be confidentiality agreements and NDAs. Agreements with our distributors or sales reps, or even agreements where we might be a distributor or a sales rep, and then agreements with consultants. So there are terms that most types of contracts would include and that you would want to pay attention to. A description of whatever's being covered in the contract. That seems rather obvious. You want to know what you're buying or selling or getting for, what you're getting. Consideration needs to be in the contract. Usually there's not a problem with that. There needs to be, you want to pay attention to a schedule. When am I going to get what I'm buying? Or when do I have to provide what I'm selling? Payment, of course that's important. Indemnity. Indemnity means that if something we provide, for example, some product that we provide injures a third party or causes damage to a third party, and that third party sues our customer, then our customer will look to McWane Company to hold them harmless. Okay, apparently we've got some audio issue here. I don't know what to do about that. I'm going to continue, and if I keep getting those kinds of messages, we may stop and do this another time. So I was saying that indemnity would be, okay. So indemnity would be where the customer would look to us and say, well, your product caused this damage. Why do I have to be involved in this claim? Hold me harmless. And usually also defend me if it's a lawsuit or something. So we want to pay attention to that because we want to make sure that if we're having to hold somebody else harmless, it's really because of something that we did or that our products did. And alternatively, if we are asking somebody else to indemnify us, we want to make sure that the provision works in our favor. Another important provision in all types of contracts would be choice of law and venue. What this means is every state in the U.S., every province in Canada, every state in India, and probably other country divisions have their own bodies of law. There may be federal laws or national laws, but there also may be state or local laws, that would govern contracts. So we want to make sure that the law that would govern our contract is something that is at best favorable to us and at worst at least not unfavorable to us. So we want to choose a state or confidential law that to govern our contracts that would be somewhat to our advantage, or at least not hurt us. And likewise, with respect to venue, that means if something goes wrong in the contract and you've got a dispute, who's going to be looking at that dispute? What court or arbitral group is going to be deciding who wins in that dispute? And that becomes especially important in international contracts because, as you well know, country laws vary drastically from one to another, and whether you can get a fair hearing in a particular area can change drastically from one area to another. So that's an important thing for us to pay attention to. Dispute resolution, similarly to where you're going to be in venue, is what kind of group is going to be deciding who wins in that dispute. So we favor arbitration over courts, but that's not all that's available. But it's something that you really need to pay attention to in most kinds of contracts. And then compliance with laws, requiring the parties to comply with applicable laws, including things like anti-corruption and employment opportunity. And lately, the state of California has put something in that requires us to talk about anti-slavery and human trafficking. So you need to look at what it's important to make sure that there's something that requires the parties to comply with those laws. And again, especially important in international contracts because of the anti-bribery, anti-corruption aspects. And term and termination. How long is this contract going to govern us? How long is it going to go on? And how can we get out of it, or how can the other party get out of it if something goes sideways? So we want to pay attention to those things. In some specific contracts, let's talk about sales. In addition to the things we just talked about, in a sales contract, you're also going to be interested in what warranty is being provided and what the remedies are if you breach that warranty. If something goes wrong, you want to know that you're getting something good for what you're paying. You also want to know, if you're selling, that you're giving something reasonable, some reasonable protection to the customer and reasonable remedies that we can live with. In our sales contracts, we're also interested in making sure that our liability is not completely unlimited. We want to make sure that we have a waiver of consequential damages. Those are things that come out of a breach or a defect that are not easy to estimate ahead of time. Things like lost profits. If, for example, you have if there's a defect in the product and they can't use it for a period of time, they lose profits, or they have downtime, or there are, extenuating damages to other parties. Those are things that are hard for us to estimate and hard for us to contain in a risk containment scenario. So we want to try to waive those, and we can. And other parties will do the same when they're selling to us. So limitation of liability. And sometimes we also need to have a cap, an overall cap on what we would have to spend if something goes wrong in the contract. In a purchasing contract, those same things are important, but we're looking at them from a different standpoint. We want to know what we're getting and what remedies we have if something goes wrong with what we're buying or what we're contracting for. So it's just a different way of looking at it, same issue. In non-disclosure agreements, no money is being given in non-disclosure agreements. This is just parties agreeing that they're going to protect each other's information, or one party agreeing it's going to protect another party's confidential information. So it's very important in those agreements to know what confidential information is. Does it have to be marked? Does it have to, or can it be oral? Or if it's oral, does it have to be reduced to writing within a certain period of time? And depending on whether it's our confidential information being protected or the other party's confidential information that we're protecting, we might have a different view on whether things need to be marked or whether oral disclosures are okay, or even visual disclosures. Think about someone walking through your facility and they see something that we consider to be confidential. We can protect that too. It's also important to look at what's not covered in a confidentiality agreement. Things that are already known by the public. Well, you don't need to protect that. Things that we already know that before we enter into this agreement, or things that we get from some other party that was not related to whoever's giving us confidential information. Another thing we want to look at is something that requires return or destruction of the information on termination. We have an issue with our IT system that, and most companies would have the same, that will not allow emails that are on our backup server to be destroyed until the end of the record retention period. So we can't return all of them. We have some handy little language that we put in that satisfies most people on that. And then you want to see what remedies are available for breaching the non-disclosure. That's an important aspect. So let's talk briefly about distributor and sales rep agreements. A distributor is one that buys our products and then turns around and resells them. A sales representative is one who arranges for a sale of our products to a third party, but doesn't actually buy our products. Instead, they make their money by arranging the sale and earning a commission. So if you keep those two things in mind, important things in those kinds of agreements. Is this an exclusive or a non-exclusive arrangement? What terms and conditions of sale apply? With a distributor, we're going to sell on our own terms and conditions. With a sales rep, we're also going to sell on our own terms and conditions. But the sales rep's not entering into the agreement with us. The distributor is. What dispute resolution is there, especially in international distributorship and sales rep situations? Choice of law and venue are all important in those agreements. Consulting agreements. We don't enter into these real frequently, but they seem to be more frequent lately, so I thought we'd talk about them. Important things in consulting agreements: delivery schedule, what are we getting and when are we getting it? Payment, that's always going to be important. What is the scope of the services of the consultant? What deliverables are they giving us? Whether this is an exclusive or a non-exclusive arrangement, are they going to be doing the same work for somebody else? And this is really important in consulting agreements. Is this consultant an independent contractor and not an employee of the company? Because what often happens is companies use a consulting arrangement to take the place of an employment arrangement, because consultants can usually be terminated more easily. And the tax groups don't like that. IRS will come down on that and say, no, that's not an that's not an independent contractor. That's an employee arrangement, and we can get in serious trouble for that. So we don't want to do that. So just a few minutes about how we manage our contracts. We have a contract management policy that provides a framework for review and acceptance of contracts. It helps us minimize our risk while facilitating positive working relationships, because it tries to not surprise people or wait till the last minute. And it provides you with approved contract forms, already reviewed by legal, already okayed by management. You're good to go with them. So where do you find this? Two places. The SharePoint Code of Conduct site under company-wide policies, right there. This is a screenshot of that, in case you didn't figure that out. And you can also, once you go to company-wide policies, once you go to the SharePoint site, you go to company-wide policies, click that button, and that will bring up all the policies, and then you can find the contract management policy in both English and Spanish at the moment. We will be adding French later and other languages as we continue to roll this out. The second place you can find it is on the McLean public website under www.mclean.com, and it's in the team members section right there. You click on team members, and then it'll pull this box open. You sign in using the username McLean Way and the password team member. Those are both all one word. And if you forget, you can look on the Code of Conduct posters that are posted in all our facilities, and it has the username and password on it. That will pull up this site, and you scroll down to Policies, General, Company-Wide, and that will pull this open, and you see there, Policies, General, Company-Wide. Click on that, and it'll open up all the policies, and you can find it. So just a few tips on review and approval of contracts. Early involvement is best, whether you're having legal review or financial review or other management reviews. Please read the contract. You've got to know what's in it, and we're going to read it. Provide background information to legal and risk management by using the review request form that we've developed. I don't have a good place for that posted just yet. We're working on that. If you need a review or a drafting of a contract, if you'll email me, I will send you the form that you can use. Allow a minimum of 10 days for review and response. We don't sit on contracts here. When they come in, we put them right into the queue for review. But we have a lot of contracts to review, so it may be that some take priority. It may be that I can turn a contract around to you in a day or less, but we like to allow at least 10 days if possible. Please stick with the same lawyer unless there's an emergency and the original lawyer you were working with is not available. This avoids confusion, overwork. It's just a much better way for us to operate. And please use approved forms whenever you can. They are there for you, and they're already blessed, and if you can get another party to agree to those forms, then you're good to go and you don't need any review. So I appreciate so much you taking the time out to listen to me ramble about contracts today. And please let me know if you have any questions. You can email me. You can email Bill Marshall or Christy Caradonna, who unfortunately is out on maternity leave right now, or even Jim Proctor, and we will be happy to help you. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing all of you again.